Donald Trump, as President Zelensky has mentioned on a couple of occasions, including just this week in a long interview in Time magazine, that he is repeating often Russian propaganda or disinformation, which is coming which is trying to strike the same chord about Ukraine, about the need for elections, about Zelensky's unpopularity. In fact, all of this has little to do with reality. And not only has it little to do with reality, because obviously the Trump team, including the Kremlin, refused to read Ukraine's constitution, which says that elections cannot take place when there's a state of martial law or emergency powers, which have been in place since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. So that's in the constitution. That it would be illegal, therefore, or unconstitutional to hold an election now. It also would be a travesty because 6 million Ukrainians are in Europe and other places abroad. There are millions of internally displaced Ukrainians, refugees. It also would be very dangerous to have, loads of Ukrainians congregating in one location to vote when Russia is still attacking Ukraine. So all of that means you can't hold elections now, and it would be indefensible to hold elections now. So the real reasons are more subtle. In the Russian case, they want to get rid of Zelensky, who they see as a kind of an obstacle to their goals. They wanted to murder him and his family and his allies when they launched the full-scale invasion in February 22. That didn't work. Russia still has this, similar to the Trump team, this idea that they know Ukraine better than the Ukrainians know it themselves. And therefore, they're still under the illusion that if Zelensky is removed in some kind of election, that a pro-Russian candidate will come to power. This is simply fantasy world. Pro-Russian political forces are obliterated. I mean, they just don't exist anymore in Ukraine. And the idea that somehow a pro-Russian candidate, like in the good old days when it used to be in a presidential election in Ukraine, you'd have a pro-Western candidate like Yushchenko or Tymoshenko and a pro-Russian candidate like Yanukovych, those days are gone. We saw that in the last two presidential elections in 2014 and 2019, when in the second round you had pro-Western candidates competing against each other. So the Russian kind of reason for getting rid of Zelensky is vindictiveness partly, but also this mythology of they seem to know Ukraine better, and they're absolutely convinced, and this is seen in a recent interview with Vladislav Surkov. He was a kind of a grey cardinal, a Rasputin guy behind Putin for many years, until about 2020, in an interview in the French newspaper L'Express, where he goes on and on about how a small minority of anti-Russian Ukrainians are lording it over and dictating to a majority of Ukrainians who are not anti-Russian. Again, this is fantasy world, complete fantasy world. Russia has, there are no Ukrainian experts in Moscow. Nobody in Moscow understands Ukraine or Ukrainians. Maybe a long time ago in the 90s they did, but as of today, there's nobody there. And therefore, the idea that this kind of a minority clique who came to power in 2014 are anti-Russian and the rest of the country is pro-Russian is fantasy world. But this is the viewpoint held in Moscow. In the case of the Trump team, this is more personal. Trump is a nasty individual. He holds a grudge. He's vindictive, and he's absolutely hates Zelensky as a person because of he blames him for his first impeachment back in 2019, 2020, when Zelensky refused to help Trump find dirt on Biden, and because Zelensky didn't want to get involved. And that has been built up as well with allegations within the MAGA crowd that the Ukrainian side has always tried to help Biden and the Democrats by campaigning on their behalf, or for example, when Zelensky toured factories in Pennsylvania, allegedly this was campaigning on behalf of Biden. So this is a personal. So Trump, again, there's nobody in the Trump team, including Trump, who has any understanding of what is Ukraine, the internal dynamics of Ukraine. Again, this is just vindictiveness to get rid of Zelensky, assuming that maybe somebody else who replaces Zelensky would be easier to deal with. Again, this is fantasy world, complete fantasy world. And not only is it fantasy world, Trump's attacks against Zelensky have actually boosted his ratings from the kind of late 40s up to over 70-75%, far higher than what Trump has. And this sort of Trump style aggression has happened and has had the same impact everywhere. The best friends of the Canadian Liberal Party are Donald Trump. The Liberals are about to lose their worst election result for decades, until Donald Trump started opening his mouth about Canada being a fake country, that Canada needs to join America, that Justin Trudeau is just a governor, not a prime minister. Well, lo and behold, the Conservatives now are likely to lose the election, or at the very least, if they still win, they're going to win with a very, very slim majority. But the Liberals are on a massive rebound. Thank you, Donald Trump. And it's the same in Panama, same in Greenland as well, or Greenland stroke Denmark. There's been a kind of a contrary example to what was intended. It's the same with Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. Russia's actions in Ukraine have just boosted Ukrainian identity. Now, what about the other candidates? If there was, for example, an election to be held tomorrow, Zelensky would probably win again. Why would he win? Because there's nobody really from the new guard, shall we say, from the new faces, like his circle, shall we say, relatively younger, not really involved in the kind of dirty business and economics and corruption of the 1990s. There's nobody else. The old guard, Petro Poroshenko, Yulia Tymoshenko, have very low popularity ratings. They are unlikely to win an election. And Zelensky, the former commander-in-chief, now the Ukrainian ambassador to Britain, he keeps being included in opinion polls, but he's never actually said he will participate in an election. So, I mean, let's get that hurdle out of the way. And even if he was to participate and he was to defeat Zelensky, he's more radical on the war than Zelensky is. Zelensky is really from Poroshenko's circle. You know, he's a kind of a center-right national Democrat. So actually, Zelensky would be more critical of the West, and he'd be certainly more anti-Russian than Zelensky is. So the idea that somehow an election would bring somebody more convenient or congenial, more pro-Russian is a myth. And the idea that he would bring somebody to power who would be more willing to basically bow down and kiss Trump's ring, again, is a myth. So I think a lot of this talk around an election is simply a complete red herring. It has nothing to do with what is taking place in Ukraine. The absolute majority of Ukrainians understand you can't hold an election during a war. You need to have a peace first. You need to have the ending of missile and drone attacks, and then you can start rebuilding the country with an election. So let's ignore the chauvinistic rantings from Moscow and the incoherent and the illiterate rantings from Washington. Thank you.